So today we have to learn about this tool support for test execution and logging. Okay, so till now we have learned regarding that planning and testing related, we can say management related tools. Now we have to learn this execution and logging. So first is test comparators. Test comparators compare the contents of files, databases, XML message, objects, and other electronic data formats. This allows expected result and actual result to be compared. They can also highlight differences and thus provide assistance to developers when localizing and debugging code. So, a comparator is like by which we can compare the contents, or we can say we can compare the result in terms of database. For example, like we are having so many types of file, XML file, JSON file, which we are getting in the execution results. If we want to compare those files with any predefined format, then we can use this test comparator type of code. They often have functions that allow specified sections of the file, screen, or object to be ignored or masked out. This means that a date or timestamp on a screen or field can be masked out as it is expected to be different when a comparison is performed. So it's like if any predefined format is defined and in there any date and timestamp is defined and we want to compare it with our date and timestamp, then definitely we can mask it in that file so that when it will be performing the comparison, it will not take that field as considered. Also for the security purpose, if we'll see like if we will mask it, then definitely, for example, if we want to compare any kind of password, then if we will mask it, then it will not compare it with any format. Table shows an exact extract from the transaction table in the hotel chain database for the data created. So with this hotel system, they got this kind of data like transaction ID, transaction date, then amount, EXC, VAT amount. After that, they having the customer ID. So this is the data they got. A regression test was run on 5/11/2006. Table 6.3 shows an extract data from the transaction table for this data. So we can say this is the data which we can say is a kind of data we are expecting from the tool, and this is a kind of data after performing the execution. This is the transaction ID, date, and VAT amount and customer ID. Now what they are saying, the transaction ID and trans date field contain different values, but we know why this is the case and we would expect them to be different. Therefore, we can mask out these values. So it will not compare the exact date, whatever we will be defined under transdate column, because we will mask it. Okay. Note that some automated test comparators use that oracles, whilst other provide functions to add on values to take into account known differences. Example 15 days later, so that the actual results and expected results can be compared. So they are actually masked out those fields in which we know the value will be changed. But for some of the values, we know this will be the same. So that's why they will not masked out. For example, in the test comparator, if they will define 100 customers will become, then they will define the customer name in a sequence. Then with the test comparator, after performing the execution, we got a file with those 100 customer name in the same sequence. Then we will not mask out that field because we want it should be in the same name and same sequence. But the date of birth can be changed of that customer. So definitely we can mask out that field. Comparators are particularly useful for regression testing since the contents of output or interface file should usually be the same. This is probably the test tool that provides the single greatest benefit. For instance, manually comparing the contents of a database query containing thousands of rows is time consuming, error prone, and demotivating. The same task can be performed accurately and in a fraction of time using a comparator. Comparators are usually included in the test execution tool. So, if someone will ask you, comparators tool will be part of which kind of tool, then definitely answer will be test execution tool. It is not at the time of test cases. We can say when we are preparing the test cases, not this is a part of not that test comparator tool. When we are performing the execution, then it's a part of comparator tool. So maybe you get such kind of question. Now we have to see test execution tool. So test execution tool allow test script to be run automatically or at least semi-automatically. A test script written in a programming language or scripting language is used to navigate through the system under test and to compare predefined expected outcomes with the actual outcomes. The result of the test runs are written to a test log. Test scripts can then be amended and reused to run on other or additional scenarios through the same system. Some tools offer GUI based utilities that enable amendments to be made to scripts more easily than by changing code. These utilities may include configuring the script to identify particular GUI objects, then customizing the script to allow it to take specified action when encountering particular GUI objects or messages, parameterizing the script to read data from various sources. So, with comparator, we have seen like mainly we are using for the large database, large comparison, large files comparison, such kind of things. But for the execution, mainly we have to check like for example, we are having a web page and there are so many objects. For example, we are having the login button, then logout button, then we are having add to cart functionality if it's a kind of e-commerce website, or we are having different options in the menu. So these are the all kind of objects. Now, when we are performing the execution, if we want to verify every object should be on correct place, and when we are clicking on every link, every object, it should redirect to particular page. So these kind of comparison we can do with the help of this test execution tool, in which we will predefine a script. So, for example, if you're doing it manually and you're having 100 objects on a web page, then definitely it will be a very time consuming task when you do it manually. But if you will write a automation script which will in which you will define all the objects on a web page previously, and then when you perform the execution in a seconds or two, it will give you the result like all the objects are coming or not. So this is a kind of execution for the GUI or graphical user interface. Now we'll see this record or capture playback tools. Record or capture playback tools can be used to record a test script and then play it back exactly as it was executed. So in Selenium also, I'm giving you the example of current industry. Like currently, Selenium is using in the most of the industries. So previously, when they have launched it as an automation tool, they have provided the IDE. Then they have gone through the web driver. So for Selenium IDE, it's like it's just the record and playback tool. So whatever you will record on a screen, it will save as a script, and when you play back the same script, then it will give you the result like everything is working fine or not. So for example, you want to record the login functionality, then with Selenium IDE, you can easily do that. And if you want to run the same script again and again, then you can save it in Selenium IDE and you can just run it. So it's a kind of record or capture playback tool under test execution. So, when the script was recorded, the customer record did not exist. When the script is playback, the system correctly recognizes that this customer record already exists and produces a different response, thus causing the test script to fail. So, they are saying what kind of error we can come. For example, you are having a sign up functionality in which when you are performing the sign up, then definitely when you are recording the things, you will provide the, we can say, email and everything. Then, if your email is already verified, then definitely when you are playing back the same script, the same sign up script, and it will use the same email, then definitely you will get a error. So it's a kind of drawback of it. Now, when a test script is played back and actual and expected results are compared, a date or time may be displayed. The comparison facility will spot the difference and report a failure. So it's the same issue, like maybe you have to compare the date and time, but every time it is getting changed. So, and you are not having any facility in that tool to provide any kind of function which will automatically take that current date or time. Then it's a drawback of that tool. You cannot actually compare that date and time. Other problems include the inability of test execution tools to recognize some types of GUI controller object. So maybe some kind of objects, for example, if you hover on any of the object, for example, we can say the add to cart functionality, and when you are hover on the tooltip, you are getting some kind of text. So maybe that tool is not capable of verifying that text, the hover functionality. So it's kind of drawback. Now, what is the use of that record tool? The recording of test can be useful during exploratory testing for reproducing a defect or for documenting how to execute a test. So, in exploratory testing, we are just exploring the things. We are more performing the testing for more and more scenarios. So, whatever scenarios are applicable, which is like capable by that execution tool, we can use that tool there. Then, uh, after that, in addition, such tools can be used to compare user actions so that the navigation through a system can be recorded, that I already explained. For example, you just identified a link and you just have to click it. Then simply you can perform it by this automation tool. In both cases, that script can then be made more robust by a technical expert so that it handles valid system behaviors depending upon the inputs and the state of the system under test. So maybe you have to perform that record and playback functionality on different operating system, Windows and Mac and Linux. So they are saying it should be, for example, it should be capable of doing that thing. It should not like you can perform the record and playback functionality on that Windows system only. Okay. Now, we have to learn this data-driven testing. So, by word, just remember this data-driven testing is a kind of like we are having more number of data and how we have to use that data to perform the testing. Robust test scripts that deal with various inputs can be converted into data-driven test. This is where hard-coded inputs in the test scripts are placed with variables that point to data in a data table. Data tables are usually spreadsheets with one test case per row, with each row containing test inputs and expected result. The test script reads the appropriate data value from the data table and insert it at the appropriate point in the script. Example, the value in the customer name column is inserted into the customer name field on the input screen. So, data driven is like if you want to perform the execution with various sets of data. For example, you want to try login with hundreds of customers on the same page. Then you can maintain that data in an Excel sheet, and when that login test case is written, you can define 100 customers login name and password. So when it will perform the execution via automation, it will take the data from that Excel file one by one, and you do not need to provide that in your script or code. So it's a kind of data driven testing. After that, we'll be having the keyword driven testing. So keyword driven is like, we can say we are having the key value pair kind of automation, in which we will define the field name and its value. So a further enhancement to data driven testing is the use of keyword driven or action word testing. Keywords are included as extra column in the table. The script reads the keyword and takes the appropriate actions and subsequent path through the system under test. Conditional programming constructs such as if-else statements or select case statements are required in the test script for keyword-driven testing. So, for example, if you want to check login with two things, valid login and invalid login, then what you will do under keyword-driven testing, you will provide two fields, username and password. So when you have to perform the testing with valid scenario, then you will provide correct username and password combination. And in the other scenario, you can define the wrong username and password. But in your script, you will not hard-codedly define that data. You will take the data from that Excel file. So it's a kind of keyword-driven testing. Now, technical skills. Programming skills and programming standards are required to use the tool effectively. It may be that these can be provided by a small team of technical experts within the test organization or from an external company. In data-driven and particularly keyword-driven approaches, the bulk of the work can be done by manual testers with no knowledge of the scripting language, defining their test cases and test data, and then running their test and raising defects as required. So it's a kind of, we can say, data driven and keyword driven. In both the things, we are just using the Excel file and we are just providing the data. Maybe you are having already a record and playback tool, and you can just taking the data from those Excel files. So it's a kind of, they are saying, it's not a complete programming. It's a kind of, we can say, partial manual thing which we are doing. Then maintenance. It is essential that time and subsequent budget is allowed for test script to be maintained. Any change to a system can mean that the test script need to be updated. Therefore, the introduction of new type of object or control could result in a mismatch being found between the previous object type and the new one. The relevant level of technical skills and knowledge is also required to this. So they are saying, uh, if you are performing any kind of automation, for example, the simple data driven and keyword driven testing also, you will be needing technical knowledge. Otherwise, you cannot alter your script, or and you will be for maintaining those test scripts also, you will be needing the technical knowledge. Otherwise, you cannot use that tool. Now, effective and efficient use. The efficiency and effectiveness benefits that come from the use of a test execution tool like a long time to come to fruition. First, the selection and implementation process needs to be planned and conducted effectively. For selecting and implementing any type of test tool is detailed later in this chapter. However, there are certain issues that are particularly relevant to test execution tools, and these are described below. So effective and efficient use is like, uh, in which condition, which type of tool we have to use. So they are defining this thing under a table in the later section of this chapter. So we'll see it later. Now, the long-term benefits of test execution tools include cost savings, as a result of the time saved by running automated tests rather than the manual test. Accuracy benefits from avoiding manual errors in execution and comparison. The ability and flexibility to use skilled testers on more useful and interesting tasks, the span with which the results of the regression pack can be obtained. So they are saying uh, for the long term, what should be the long term benefits of any automation tool? First will be the cost, as we already know it will save a lot of cost. Secondly, accuracy we will be needing because in manual testing maybe we cannot actually accurately check that, but via automation if you have a predefined script then definitely there's a less chance of missing those errors. Then we can say the speed with which we are performing the regression, because if we are having thousands of test cases then definitely it's good to automate them. uh, Otherwise we'll be needing more and more resources to perform the same task. Note that benefits come primarily from running the same or very similar test a number of times on a stable platform. Therefore, they are generally most useful for regression testing. So, generally, automation is this kind of test execution automation mainly is for the regression testing. So now this is the same in hotel chain scenario. So though they are just explaining one scenario for that execution, and after that they are just explaining to write the automation script for the same scenario. Now just see this test execution tools playback model, in which this is the same diagram which we have already seen in one of the chapter. I do not remember right now, but this is the same. They are showing here uh, this is the cost and number of times that the automated script is run, and this is the break even point. So you can say in manual regression test, you can see number of times the automated script is run. In manual regression the script is running more time, also the cost is very high. And when you say automated regression test, then cost is low compared to that manual regression test. So, and this is the break even point. So they are saying at some point the cost will be same for both manual regression test and automated regression test. So this is the diagram which they are showing just for the cost purpose. There's not much use. Now we have to learn this test harness. Test harness, also known as unit test framework tools, are used primarily by the developers to simulate a small section of the environment in which the software will operate. So you will definitely get this question in your ISTQB. So just remember what is test harness and who is using that tool. So test harness is mainly using at the time of unit testing, and we know unit testing is mainly done by the developers. So by these 2 points you have to remember the test harness will be used by the developer. Test harness tool mainly used by the developer. They are usually written in-house by developers to perform component or integration testing for a specific purpose. Test harness often use mock objects known as stubs, which stub out the need to have other components or system by returning predefined values, and drivers, which replace the calling component or system and drive transactions, messages, and commands through the software under test. So we have already learned under the integration test in second chapter, like we are using these stubs and driver, right? So uh, you have to remember this thing as well. Like I think I got this kind of question in my exam, like what is calling module and what is called module. So always remember this line, and if you are writing any notes, Minju, then just write it. Driver is the calling module, okay? It's a very small line, but
Driver is the calling module, right?
yeah, driver is
Okay.
calling module and stub is called module. Okay. So
Okay.
if you will get this question, what is calling module, then you have to choose driver. And if you have to
Mm-hmm.
choose what is called module, then you have to choose a stub.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So test harness is mainly, you have to remember 2 points here. It is for the unit testing done by the developer. And mainly for the integration testing also we can use it, but mainly for the unit testing we are using it. Test harness can be used to test various systems or objects ranging from a middleware system to a single or small group of components. So test harness can be used to test various systems or objects ranging from a middleware system to a single or small group of components. So we are having multiple components. We can use it for the unit testing and we can use it for the integration testing. So it's mainly used by the developer. So this is the example. Here they are just showing this diagram for the this middleware. One moment. Hmm. So, in this middleware, they are just showing we are having three components. Okay, this is the middleware system which is connected with this XML message and stub to replicate mainframe. So we are having this XML messages. For example, we are having this middleware system and XML messages. XML message. Consider it as two components. One component is middleware system and another component is XML messages. So in integration testing, remember what we do? We are just preparing the replica of those component, and we are not actually for example, the code is already developed for this middleware system, but for this XML message code is not already developed. So what we'll do, we will create a kind of replica for this XML messages or for this middleware system, and when actual code is developed, then we will replace that replica. So they are just showing the example for the integration testing. We can use this test harness, and here we can just prepare this stub to replicate the this middleware. So they are just saying this middleware is not ready. So we are using stub at the place of this middleware system. When the actual middleware system is ready, we will replace it with this stub. Now, coverage measurement tools. First is we have to run this. There are similarities with the principle behind data-driven testing using test execution tools, as the harness allows many different test cases to be designed and run without the time-consuming process of keying them manually. This raises the question of how much benefit can be obtained from using a test execution tool when a test harness can be used instead. As usual, it depends on the circumstances, the risk, the purpose, and the level of testing being performed. So, they are saying this is the same thing. We can use data driven and keyword driven testing as well in terms of unit testing if we want, but we have to check the purpose, the risk, everything, the object when we are choosing the tool. So, for the execution, we have to consider these things in mind when we are performing. Now we have to learn on this coverage measurement. Okay, so now we have to learn this coverage measurement tools. Coverage measurement tools measure the percentage of the code structure covered across white box measurement techniques such as statement coverage and branch or decision coverage. So, in the fourth chapter, you will learn about the statement coverage, branch coverage, and condition coverage. For now, just remember for these kind of situations, we are using this coverage measurement tools. And if you're getting the question for white box testing or for white box measurement techniques, what kind of tool we have to use? So its answer will be coverage measurement tool. Coverage measurement tools are often integrated with static and dynamic tools and are primarily used by developers. So mainly they are saying coverage measurement tools is also mainly used by the developers, as the test harness used will be used by the developer test harness tool, and the second will be this coverage measurement tool. This will be also mainly used by the developers. Coverage measurement tools can measure code written in several programming languages, but not all tools can measure code written in all languages. They are useful for reporting coverage measurement and can therefore be used to assess test completion criteria and or exit criteria. This kind of question you can come by which tool we can measure this reporting coverage. For example, the exit criteria or test completion criteria. So the answer will be test coverage tool, or the coverage measurement tool is using for checking or checking the report or the criteria for this completion or execution exit. Now, coverage measurement of requirements and test cases scripts can usually be obtained from test management tools. This function is unlikely to be provided by coverage measurement tools. Coverage measurement can be carried out using intrusive or non-intrusive methods. Non-intrusive methods typically involve reviewing code and running code. Intrusive methods such as instrumenting the code involves extra statements into the code. The code is then executed and the extra statement write back to a log in order to identify which statements and branches have been executed. Instrumentation code can then be removed before it goes to the production. Intrusive methods can affect the accuracy of a test because, for example, slightly more processing will be required to cope with the additional code. This is known as the probe effect, and tester need to be aware as its consequences and try to keep its impact to a minimum. Okay, so now this coverage measurement tool we can use at the time of checking the reporting, and secondly mainly it is using by the developers. Okay, now in terms of testing activities where we can use it, first for checking the test cases thing, test scripts thing. If we are generally running it and we want to check how much coverage is there, for example, for the 1,000 test cases, you have written the script for 900 test cases and 100 test cases are not covered. So for that, we can use this coverage measurement tool. Secondary, we can use it for intrusive and non-intrusive method. So what is intrusive and non-intrusive? Non-intrusive is we can say in which we are not writing any code. We are just reviewing the documents and reviewing the code, and we can say we are just running it. Actually, we are not we are not defining the whole coding procedure in this non-intrusive method. But in intrusive method, it's like, for example, take the scenario with this non-intrusive method. You have provided some kind of code, and as the coverage, you're just checking by this code, I am covering this test cases. Okay, now after performing the execution, you got to know like these conditions are missing in my code to check this particular scenario. So in that case, what you will do, you just have to provide some extra conditions in your code. So it's a kind of intrusive where you are providing the extra conditions in your code. And non-intrusive is like you have just written the code as per the scenario and you are just executing it. Okay. So this is the example of this in hotel chains. Here you have to remember one more thing, like what is probe effect. So you just have to remember this. Like, intrusive methods can affect the accuracy of a test because, for example, slightly more processing will be required to cope with the additional code. This is known as probe effect. So, uh, it's very complicated kind of language. For example, you have to remember it like, uh, uh, what is the intrusive method in which we are just writing more code to check more conditions. Simple. Now, if we are just providing more code in the same code to check the multiple conditions, then at some point it is not required to provide so many uh, kind of conditions in that code. It's a kind of probe effect in which you have to decide, like, at which point I have to stop this, and also try to keep the impact as minimum. For example, it should not be like you will be providing more and more code to cover more and more conditions. You have to check its impact as well. It's not like your code will get a failure. You will just writing it, and at some point it gets failed. So you have to check its impact as well. So this is known as the probe effect. Now this is the same use in hotel chain scenario in which they are saying coverage measurement tools are generally used on high risk and safety critical systems and therefore would probably not be used in the hotel chain scenario. However, as an example, assume that the exit criteria for a test phase include the criteria shown in this table. So this is the exit criteria they are just defining for this hotel chain scenario, like module risk level, branch coverage, and statement coverage. So for BACS function, module risk level is high and branch coverage is 100% and statement coverage should be 100%. It's the exit criteria. Then same for mail short, lookup error. This is a kind of functions which we are just providing in our code, and they are just providing the module risk level, and as per that they are providing the branch coverage, and we can say the statement coverage. In this case, coverage measurement tools would be okay. So in this case, coverage measurement tools would be the most appropriate method for assessing whether the exit criteria have been met. So for coverage measurement tools, we have to check the most appropriate method of assessing whether the exit criteria have been met. So mainly, if you are getting the question like where we have to check the exit criteria is meeting properly or not, by which kind of tool? So the example will be coverage measurement tool. Okay. Now we have to learn this security tool. And don't worry, in the last, we are having a summary table for this chapter in which every kind of tool is defined, its use is defined, and also conditions where we have to use it, and also it is used by whom, developers or testers. So you have to read this table and remember it in the last, and also the key points whichever I am just explaining in these sessions, just remember that you will get the questions around that only. Okay. Now
Okay.
we have to learn the security tools. Security testing tools are used to test the functions that detect security threats and to evaluate the security characteristic of software. The security tool would typically be used to assess the ability of the software under test to handle computer viruses, protect data confidentiality and data integrity, prevent unauthorized access, carry out authentication checks of users, remain available under a denial of service attack, check out non-repetition attributes of digital signatures. So, as the name suggests, security tool will be used for the security purpose. So you just have to remember these kind of conditions, like if we want to protect the data, if we want data integrity, data confidentiality, authentication, authorization, and we can say if any kind of virus or service attack will happen, then how your application is, we can say, behaving in that situation, whether you are covering this security kind of testing in your application or not. What so in that case you have to use this security tool. So they are already available in the market. There are so many security tools by which you can check your application is secure or not. Now, security testing tools are mainly used to test e-commerce, e-business, and websites. For example, a third-party security application such as a firewall may be integrated into a web-based application. So we are having a web-based application, and with this security, we are just providing the layering in the same web page. For example, if someone wants to steal any kind of information from that web page, then we are just providing a kind of layer, a kind of firewall, which will block the user to do that. So it's a kind of security testing. The skills required to develop and use security tools are very specialized, and such tools are generally developed and used on a particular technology platform for a particular purpose. Therefore, it may be worth considering the use of specialist consultancies to perform such testing. Everyone cannot perform the security testing. If you're not having the knowledge of that tools, then definitely you cannot perform the testing. So there is a specialized team or specialized users are required to perform this kind of testing. Security tools need to be constantly updated as there are problems solved and new vulnerabilities discovered all the time. Consider the number of Windows XP security releases to see the scale of the security problems. So, previously they have launched this Windows XP. Then after that, Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 9, Windows 8, then Windows 10, currently which mainly we are using. Okay, so why they have upgraded their systems? Definitely, in Windows XP there were so many security problems, so that's why they have just launched the upgraded version. Same we can consider for our application. For example, if your application is only supporting the Windows XP, then definitely there will be so many security problems in your application. Then you have to upgrade it to perform to support on different operating systems as well. So it's a kind of example here. Now, in the same chain scenario, security tools could be used to test that the firewall surrounding the website can prevent disruption from any type of attack that is specified with the security tool that I already explained. In addition, encryption of XML messages to validate bank account details could be tested. Now, for example, from your banks you're getting the messages. If you are for example, if you are performing any kind of transaction, if you are purchasing the things, or if you are getting any kind of refund, then you're getting the messages on your mobiles, or we can say you're getting the mail if you are already verified your mail with your bank account. Then if there is no security, if they have defined and they are just sending you those messages, then definitely it's a kind of breach, because your message and your information is not secured. For example, if you want to download your bank statement from the internet banking, then and you're not providing any kind of password protected OTP captcha, this kind of thing, and you are just going to the website and you're just downloading the statement, and any third party attacker will come and they will steal your information from there, then it's a kind of security breach. So definitely there should be any encryption required in that condition. Now, check of understanding. Why is implementing comparator likely to be a cheaper and quicker than implementing the test execution tool? Why? Because in comparator, we are just comparing the database, comparing the files. Uh, we are just providing the information in the Excel sheet, and we are just comparing the things. In test execution tool, we are requiring a proper tool, or it can be more costly also, because in test execution we have to write the script. We should have the understanding. Obviously we will be requiring more technical resources in that cases, so that's why comparator is cheaper than this test execution tool. Why is the use of test execution tools for record and playback not as effective as it may sound? So I've already explained it. Like in record and playback, I have explained the sign up and login scenario, so you already know it. Now, our test execution tools most likely, are test execution tools likely to be more useful for testing new systems or testing changes to existing systems? Explain why. So, test execution tools most likely to be useful for uh, testing changes to existing systems, because mainly we are using at the regression purpose. Because in regression we can just execute same this we want to execute same set of test cases, so where there we can use this uh, test automation tool. Would both a test execution tool and a test harness be appropriate for acceptance testing? No. Test execution tool we can use in acceptance testing, but test harness, I already explained, it is used by the developers and for the unit testing only. Name three potential benefits from implementing a test execution tool, that I already explained. Give three reasons why a test harness is an efficient way of testing components. So that I already explained what is test harness and why developers are using it. Which test execution and logging tools are typically used by developers? So this is a kind of uh, I already explained. First will be the test harness tool that developers are using, and second is that coverage measurement tool that developers are using. Now, which test execution and logging tools are likely to be used by specialists in the use of that tool? So, which kind of tool we specialists are using? This is a kind of security tool, because security tool, if we are not having the knowledge, then we cannot use it. Now, the next thing will be tool support for performance and monitoring. So, this is the dynamic testing tool. Dynamic analysis tools are used to detect the type of defects that are difficult to find during static testing. They are typically used by developers during component testing and component integration testing. So, dynamic testing is mainly used at the time of white box testing, we can say, and they are mainly using to detect the type of defect that are difficult to find during static testing. In static testing, we are just reviewing the documents and all, but in dynamic testing, we are just checking the code mainly. So for that, we can say it is mainly used by the developers during the unit testing and during the integration or component testing. Why they are using it? To report on the state of software during its execution, monitor the allocation, use and relocation of memory, identify memory leaks, time dependency, unassigned pointers, check pointer arithmetic. So these are all technical terms by which developers are using it. They are generally used for safety critical and other high risk software where reliability is critical. So if you get this kind of line, where we are using the safety critical and high risk software for safety critical environment and high risk software, where reliability is critical, what type of tool we are using. So dynamic testing tools we are using there. Okay. Now, dynamic analysis tools are often integrated with static analysis and coverage measurement tools. For example, a developer may want to perform static analysis on code to localize defects so that they can be removed before component test execution. The integrated tool may allow the code to be analyzed statically, the code to be instrumented, the code to be executed. Okay, so it's a kind of, we can say, we can integrate both the three tools, which is the uh, static analysis and coverage measurement and dynamic analysis. Uh, Consider, for example, a scenario. Firstly, you have the code. Firstly, you will perform the static analysis to check the standards of that code. Secondary, you will perform this dynamic analysis, whether your code is correct or not. For example, the if else statement, the arrays, the pointers, everything. And after that, you can perform the coverage analysis by performing the execution of that code. How many statements and how many conditions are covered for that code. So we can integrate all these three tools. Now, dynamic analysis tools are usually language specific. So, to test code written in C++, you would need to have a version of a dynamics analysis tool that was specific to C++. Obviously, if your code is written in Java, then you cannot use the C sharp build tool to check your code. Definitely, you will be needing same uh, Java developed tool to use that to check that code. The tool could then report static defects, report dynamic defects, provide coverage measurement figures, report upon the code being executed at various instrumentation points. So everything we can get from this tool. What type of tool we are using, it depends on that. If we are using the static analysis, then it will give you the static analysis. Dynamic, it will give the dynamic kind of errors. And if you are using coverage measurement, then it will provide you the coverage of your code. Hmm. This is the same. I'm just explaining it by my own language for this scenario. So, for example, uh, in that same hotel management scenario, you see different kind of components are there for messages, for transaction, the central system, for everything. So there we can use this kind of tool for static testing and for dynamic testing, and also for the coverage measurement if we want to check for every component coverage, or when we are integrating all the components, then how the coverage measurement is happening. So in that case we can use that tool. Now, performance testing, load testing, stress testing tools. Till now, we have learned this security testing. After that, we learned this dynamic testing, which is mainly using on the code side. And now we are just learning this performance, load, or stress testing tool. So remember, security tools will be used by the specialized team. You will definitely get this kind of question in your exam. Remember, coverage measurement tools, dynamic tools, and test harness. All these are mainly used by the developers. Okay. Now, performance testing is very difficult to do accurately and in a repeatable way without using test tools. Therefore, performance testing tools have been developed to carry out both load testing and stress testing. No, what is load testing? So, load testing is like your application is made to capable of taking load of 1,000 users. Then you will perform the load testing to check whether it is capable of taking the load of 1,000 users. What is the stress testing? In stress testing, you are just keep increasing the load by your we can say if the application is taking the load of 1,000 users, you can check it with the 1,200 users to check its capability, whether it's able to uh, whether it's sustainable for that load or not. So we are just increasing the load from its predefined capability. So we are calling it as stress testing. So they are explaining the same thing here. Load testing reports upon the performance of a system under test under various loads and usage patterns. A load generator, which is a type of test driver, can be used to simulate the load and required usage pattern by creating virtual users. For example, we are having a JMeter tool in load testing, which industries are generally using. By this tool, we can, for example, we can provide the maximum number of load in the application, and we can see how the application is behaving in that condition. So it's a kind of load testing automation tool. Okay. Alternatively, response times or transaction times can be measured under various levels of usage by running automated repeated test scripts via the user interface of the system under test. In both cases, output will be returned to a log. Reports or graphs can be generated from the contents of the log to monitor the level of performance. It's a very important kind of aspects in today's industries. Previously, they are not taking this in consideration for this performance testing or load testing, but for in today's era, it is very important. So, by which, for example, if you are providing 1,000 user load in your website or application, and you want to check the report in different format, for example in graph format or logs you want to check, or you want to check the data in the form of pie chart, then there are so many tools available in today's market which can do this. Performance testing tools can also be used for stress testing. Stress testing, I already explained you the same thing they are explaining here, to increasing the load with it, with its capability. Performance testing tools can be used against whole systems, but they can also be used during system integration test